Jake Morrison stood in the cold metal room with his hands behind his back and his eyes looking straight ahead at the 5 judges who would decide his fate. The room smelled like cleaning chemicals and fear. 3 of the judges were human, but 2 were not. The aliens had gray skin and black eyes that never seemed to blink. They watched Jake like he was some kind of dangerous animal that needed to be put down. Admiral Patricia Vance sat in the middle chair. She had been Jake's teacher when he was young and his friend when he got older. Now she had to judge him for what the military called his greatest crime. Her face looked tired and sad, but her voice stayed strong when she read from the paper in front of her. Captain Jake Morrison, you are charged with disobeying direct orders during combat operations at Kepler Station. You were told to protect the weapons storage facility. Instead, you abandoned your post to evacuate civilians. Because of your choice, we lost advanced military equipment worth billions of credits to enemy forces. Jake remembered that day 6 months ago. The attack had come fast and hard. Enemy ships had broken through their defenses like they were made of paper. The base commander had screamed orders through the radio telling all units to guard the weapon stores and let the civilians figure out their own escape. Jake had looked at the 300 people trapped in the civilian quarters, families with children, old people who could not run fast, scientists who had never held a weapon. He had made his choice in seconds. He took his squad and fought through enemy lines to get those people to the escape pods. Every person made it out alive. But while he was saving lives, the enemy took the weapons. Advanced human technology that would now be used against them in future battles. You put civilian lives above military objectives, said one of the alien judges. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. This shows humans cannot be trusted with important commands. You think with your hearts instead of your minds. The other alien nodded with approval. The Galactic Council has made its decision. Captain Morrison will be exiled to Terminus 7. He will be given basic survival gear and left to face whatever fate awaits him there. Jake felt something cold move through his chest, but he did not let it show on his face. Everyone knew about Terminus 7. It was where the Council sent people they wanted to disappear forever. The planet was a nightmare world with crushing gravity and monsters that hunted anything that moved. Most people died within hours of landing. The few who lasted longer usually went crazy from the isolation and the constant fear. Admiral Vance looked like someone had hit her in the stomach. The punishment seems excessive for a man who saved 300 lives. Those lives were not his to save, the first alien said. He had orders he chose to disobey. This is the consequence of that choice, Jake finally spoke. His voice was calm and steady. I would make the same choice again, every time. The aliens looked at each other with something that might have been satisfaction. The human judges looked at the floor. Admiral Vance closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Transport will be arranged immediately. Lieutenant Commander Alex Carter will pilot the exile ship. You have 1 hour to prepare. The guards came to take Jake away, but Admiral Vance held up her hand. Give us a moment. When the room was empty, except for the 2 of them, she walked around the table and stood in front of her former student. For the first time since the trial started, her voice cracked a little. Jake, I tried everything. I called in every favor. I begged them to consider your service record. 20 years of perfect duty. 3 medals for bravery. The lives you saved. On Europa Station, none of it mattered. Jake looked at the woman who had taught him how to be a soldier and a leader. You did what you could, Pat. We both know this was never really about Kepler Station. The Council has been looking for an excuse to get rid of me ever since I started asking questions about their policies. She nodded sadly. You were getting too popular with the other human colonies. Too many people were starting to listen when you talked about humans deserving better treatment. Maybe that is exactly what needs to happen. An hour later, Jake stood in the transport bay with a small bag of supplies and Alex Carter beside him. The pilot was young and nervous. He kept checking his equipment like he was afraid something would break. The transport ship was small and dark. It would take 3 days to reach Terminus 7. As they walked up the ramp, Alex spoke quietly. Sir, I want you to know that what you did at Kepler Station was right. Those civilians deserve to live. Jake put his hand on the young man's shoulder. Just get me where I am going, Carter. After that, your job is done? The ship lifted off and carried them away from everything Jake had ever known toward a world where he was expected to die alone and forgotten. The transport ship shook and rattled as it broke through the thick clouds around Terminus 7. Jake looked out the small window and saw a world that looked like someone had painted it with shades of gray and brown. Rocky Mountains stretched as far as he could see, with deep valleys cut between them like scars, no green anywhere. No sign that anything good could grow in this place. Alex Carter checked his instruments and shook his head. Gravity is 2.3 times Earth normal. Sir, atmosphere is breathable, but barely. Temperature outside is 40 degrees below what humans like. And the scanner is picking up movement down there. Big movement. Jake picked up his survival pack and checked the contents one more time. A small shelter tent. Water purification tablets. Emergency food for maybe 10 days if he was careful. A basic medical kit. A knife. A small plasma pistol with 2 energy cells. It was not much to keep a man alive on a world like this. Find me a spot that looks less dangerous than the others. Jake said. Alex found a flat area between 2 rocky hills that seemed empty of the large, moving shapes their scanner had detected elsewhere. The transport touched down with a heavy thud. The back door opened and Jake felt the crushing weight of the planet hit him like a physical blow. Each step felt like he was carrying another person on his back. Sir, Alex said as Jake walked toward the door. I could report engine trouble. Say we had to turn back? Jake smiled for the first time in days. You would be court-martialed for helping me. Get back to your life, Carter. Maybe someday you can tell people that you knew a man who tried to do the right thing. Jake stepped off the ship and immediately felt the cold bite into his face. The air smelled like metal and something that might have been death. The transport door closed behind him and the engines fired up. In seconds, the ship was just a dot in the gray sky, and then it was gone completely. The silence that followed was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. No birds. No insects, no wind. Just the sound of his own breathing and his heart working. Too hard against the heavy gravity. He looked around at the landscape and tried to decide which direction might lead to shelter or water. That was when he heard the howl. It came from somewhere behind the rocky hills, and it was answered by another howl from a different direction. Then another. Jake had heard recordings of the creatures that lived on Terminus 7. The locals called them stone wolves, but they were nothing like the wolves from Earth. They were the size of horses with teeth, like knives, and hides tough enough to stop. Small weapons fired. Jake started walking toward higher ground where he might be able to see more of the area. Each step was a struggle against the gravity that wanted to pull him down. His legs burned after just a few minutes and his breathing came hard and fast. The cold was getting worse as the sun moved toward the horizon. The howls were getting closer. Jake reached the top of a small rise and looked back the way he had come. 3 shapes were moving across the flat area where the transport had landed. Even from this distance he could see they were big and they were following his trail. He had maybe 20 minutes before they caught up to him. That was when he saw the cave. It was little more than a crack in the rock face, but it looked deep enough to provide shelter. Jake half ran and half stumbled down the slope toward it. His pack bounced on his back and his lungs felt like they were on fire. The howling was very close now. Jake reached the cave entrance just as the first stone vault came around the rocks below him. It was even bigger than he had expected. Gray fur over muscles that moved like steel cables. Yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. It saw him and let out a roar that echoed off the canyon walls. Jake squeezed into the cave opening. The space inside was narrow, but it went back farther than his small flashlight could show. The vault reached the entrance and tried to push its massive head through the gap. Its claws scraped against the rock as it tried to dig the opening wider. For several hours, the wolves took turns trying to get at him. They would leave for a while and then come back to try again. Jake sat in the darkness and listened to them. Eventually they gave up and went to hunt easier prey. Jake moved deeper into the cave system and found something that made his heart jump with hope. The walls were carved with tool marks, Someone had been here before. Someone had made this cave bigger and more comfortable. He followed the carved passage and found a larger chamber. There was a pile of old blankets in one corner, some metal containers that might hold food or water, tools hanging from pegs driven into the rock. And sitting in the middle of it all was a woman who looked like she had been waiting for him. She was maybe 40 years old with dark hair and tired eyes. Her clothes were patched and dirty, but she looked healthy and strong. When she saw Jake, she smiled like she was seeing an old friend. "Welcome to paradise," she said. "I am Elena Rodriguez, and you just became the newest member of the most exclusive club in the galaxy. We are the people nobody wanted, but death would not take." Elena led Jake deeper into the cave system, where he discovered that her small chamber was just the beginning. The tunnels opened into larger spaces where other people lived and worked. Jake met Roy Jenkins, who had been an engineer before the Council sent him here for refusing to build weapons that could destroy entire cities. Lisa Park had been a communications expert until she tried to expose corruption in the food supply system. All told, there were 37 people living in this underground community. They had been surviving for months by staying hidden during the day and scavenging at night. The caves provided protection from the stone wolves and the crushing cold that came after dark. Elena had found ways to grow mushrooms in the deeper chambers using waste heat from thermal vents. Roy had built water collection systems and basic tools from salvaged metal. Lisa had managed to keep a small radio working, though she could only pick up signals from passing ships. "The key is to never go outside during feeding time," Elena explained as she showed Jake around their makeshift home. "The stone wolves hunt at dawn and dusk. During the middle of the day they sleep in the deep valleys. Late at night they go back to their dens. If you time it right, you can move around on the surface for a few hours." Jake learned their routines quickly, but something strange began to happen after his first week underground. He started to feel different, stronger somehow despite the heavy gravity that had nearly crushed him when he first arrived. His cuts healed faster than they should have. His hearing became so sharp he could detect the wolves moving around outside. Even when the others could not hear anything, Elena noticed the changes too. She had been a doctor and scientist before her exile, and she was fascinated by what she saw. "Your body is adapting," she told him one evening as they sat around their small fire. "I have been watching it happen to all of us, but never this fast. Something about this planet is changing us." Roy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Changing us into what? Monsters like those things outside?" "Maybe something better than what we were before," Lisa said quietly. She had been listening to transmissions from human colonies, and the news was not good. More restrictions, more controls, humans being moved to worse planets with fewer resources. "Sometimes I think they sent us here hoping we would become something they could use as an excuse to be even harder on the rest of our people." Jake found himself thinking about that possibility more and more as the weeks passed. The changes in his body were becoming impossible to ignore. He could lift rocks that should have been too heavy to move. He could see clearly in darkness that would have blinded him before. When he concentrated, he could sense the stone wolves even when they were still far away. The others were changing too, but not as quickly or dramatically as Jake. Elena theorized that the planet's unique radiation combined with the stress of survival was triggering dormant genetic codes that evolution had built into humans over millions of years. Humans had always been the most adaptable species in the galaxy, but something had been suppressing that ability. The first real test of Jake's new capabilities came during a supply run to a crashed transport ship that Roy had spotted in a distant valley. The ship had gone down months ago, but nobody had dared to make the dangerous journey to reach it. The route would take them through Stone Wolf territory during the day and back through it again at night. Jake volunteered to go alone, but Elena and Roy insisted on coming with him. They left before dawn and made good time across the rocky terrain. If that would have exhausted Jake completely just a month earlier, now he moved over the difficult ground like it was flat pavement. Elena and Roy struggled to keep up even though they had been on the planet much longer. They reached the crash site. without incident and found the ship had been carrying medical supplies and replacement parts for mining equipment. The cargo hold was intact and full of things they desperately needed, but as they loaded their packs, Jake heard something that made his blood turn cold. Stone wolves were moving toward them from 3 directions, a large pack that had been hunting. "In the area, we need to go now," Jake said. The others could not hear the wolves yet, but they trusted his warning. They started back toward the caves, moving as fast as the heavy packs and crushing gravity would allow. The wolves appeared on the ridge behind them when they were still 2 hours from safety. Jake could see them clearly even though Elena and Roy were squinting and shading their eyes. 7 massive predators loping across the rocks like they weighed nothing at all. "They are gaining on us," Jake said. He made a decision that surprised even himself. "Keep going toward the caves. I will slow them down." Before the others could argue, Jake dropped his pack and turned to face the approaching wolves. He pulled out his small plasma pistol and checked the charge. Maybe enough energy for 6 shots if he was lucky. Not nearly enough to stop 7 stone. "Wolves?" The pack leader reached him first, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to move. Jake fired twice and saw both shots hit the creature center mass. The plasma bolts that should have dropped any normal animal just seemed to make it angry. It leaped at him with claws extended and jaws open wide enough to bite his head. Jake did something that should have been impossible. He sidestepped the attack and grabbed the Volf by its thick neck as it passed by him. Using the creature's own momentum, he spun around and threw it into the rocks with enough force to break bones. The Volf hit the stone wall with a wet thud and did not get up again. The other wolves hesitated for just a moment, and Jake used that hesitation to put 2 more plasma bolts into the nearest one. This time his shots found soft spots between the armored hide and the creature went down hard. The remaining 5 wolves spread out to surround him. Jake dropped the useless pistol and picked up a piece of broken rock that weighed more than he did. He should not have been able to lift it, let alone swing it like a weapon, but his transformed body moved with power and speed that defied everything he thought he knew about human limitations. Word began to spread through the dark corners of the galaxy that impossible things were happening on Terminus 7. Smugglers and traders who worked the outer rim routes whispered stories in cantinas and docking bays. They claimed to have detected strange signals coming from the death world where no signals should exist. Some said they had seen lights moving across the planet's surface in patterns that looked almost like cities. The Galactic Council dismissed these reports as the fantasies of people who spent too much time alone in space. Terminus 7 was a tomb world where exiles went to die quickly and quietly. Nothing could survive there for long, and certainly nothing could thrive. But Jake and his growing community were doing exactly that. The battle with the Stone Wolves had been a turning point. Jake had killed 5 of the massive predators using nothing but his bare hands and pieces of broken rock. When Elena and Roy found him afterward, he was sitting calmly among the dead creatures without a scratch on his body. That night they held a celebration in the caves, and for the first time since their exile, people actually smiled and laughed. More importantly, they began to believe that survival was not their only option. Maybe they could build something here. Maybe they could become something more than what they had been before their exile. Jake found himself becoming the natural leader of their small group, though he never asked for the position. People came to him when they had problems or disagreements. They looked to him when decisions needed to be made. He realized that his transformation was not just physical. Something about the planet and the stress of survival was bringing out leadership qualities that had been buried under years of military protocol and alien oversight. Roy had been busy with his engineering projects, using salvaged materials from crashed ships that were scattered across the planet. He had built a communications array that was more powerful than anything their small group should have been able to construct. Lisa used it to reach out to human colonies across the galaxy, and what she heard made her angry enough to take risks. The news from the human worlds was getting worse every day. New restrictions on movement and commerce. Forced relocations to planets with fewer resources. humans being removed from positions of authority in their own governments. The Galactic Council was systematically crushing human independence, and most people were too scared or too tired to fight back. Lisa began broadcasting messages of hope and resistance on frequencies that the Council monitored. She told the story of Terminus 7 and the people who had not just survived exile, but had grown stronger because of it. She shared what Elena had learned about human adaptation and what Jake had proven about human potential when it was allowed to develop freely. "They sent us here to die," Lisa said during one of her broadcasts that reached 17 human colonies. "But they gave us something they never intended. They gave us a world where we could discover what humans are really capable of when we stop accepting limits that others place on us." The underground community grew as more transport ships arrived with new exiles. But something remarkable happened to each group that landed. Instead of dying within hours or days as the Council expected, they were rescued by people who had learned to move across the dangerous surface like it was their natural home. Jake personally led rescue missions that brought back scientists and soldiers and engineers who had been exiled for refusing to submit to alien authority. Each new arrival went through the same transformation that had changed Jake and the original survivors. The planet's unique environment awakened genetic potential that had been dormant in humans for thousands of years. They became stronger and faster and more resilient than baseline humans. More importantly, they became unified in ways that normal human communities rarely achieved. Elena had been studying the changes, and she made a discovery that excited and frightened her. The transformation was not random. It was following patterns that suggested human DNA contained instructions for adaptation that were far more advanced than anyone had realized. Humans were not just another species that had developed intelligence and technology. They were something designed to survive and thrive under conditions that would kill most other forms of life. "We have been thinking about this wrong," Elena told Jake as they stood on a high ridge overlooking their expanding settlement. "The Council did not send us here to die. They sent us here to become something they fear." Jake looked out at the valley where nearly 200 people now lived and worked. They had established sustainable food production using modified crops that thrived in the harsh soil. They had domesticated some of the smaller predators and learned to avoid the larger ones. Most remarkably, they had begun to work together with an efficiency and coordination that seemed almost supernatural. "Maybe it is time to let them know what we have become," Jake said. That night they made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of hiding their existence, they would announce themselves to the galaxy. Lisa began broadcasting on channels that every human colony could receive. She told their story in detail and challenged other humans to stop accepting the limitations that alien governments placed on them. The response was immediate and powerful. Human colonies that had been suffering under increasingly harsh restrictions suddenly erupted in coordinated resistance. Workers went on strike. Military units refused orders. Civilians began organizing themselves into groups that demanded better treatment. The rebels fought with tactics and determination that surprised the Council forces sent to crush them. They moved like they could read their enemies' minds. They seemed to know where attacks would come from before they happened. They displayed endurance and courage that violated every psychological profile the Council had on human behavior. Intelligence reports began reaching the Council chambers that spoke of human soldiers displaying impossible abilities, lifting equipment that should have required machinery, moving through terrain that should have been impassable, fighting with coordination that seemed to transcend normal communication methods. Chairman Vexer of the Galactic Council called an emergency session to address what their military commanders were calling the human problem. The reptilian leader had ruled the galaxy for decades through careful control of resources and populations. Humans had always been useful because they were adaptable and hardworking, but they were also easily controlled through economic pressure and social manipulation. Now something had changed, and Vexer did not understand what or how. Human resistance cells were operating across dozens of worlds with a level of coordination that should have been impossible without advanced communication networks that the Council would have detected. Even more disturbing were reports of individual humans displaying physical capabilities that their own scientists said were biologically impossible. Find the source of this rebellion, Vexor ordered his intelligence chief. There must be someone organizing and training these humans. Find them and eliminate them before this spreads any further. The investigation led inevitably to Terminus 7 and the man who had been sent there to die 3 years earlier. Chairman Vexor stood in the center of the council war room, staring at reports that made no sense according to everything he thought he knew about human limitations. On the massive display screen, dozens of red dots marked human rebellions across the galaxy. Each dot represented a world where humans had stopped following orders and started fighting back with abilities that violated basic biological science. Show me the surveillance data from Terminus 7 again, Vexor commanded. The screen changed to display grainy images, captured by spy drones that had barely survived their reconnaissance mission to the Death World. The footage showed humans moving across terrain that should have been impossible to traverse. They carried loads that should have required mechanical assistance. They worked together with coordination that seemed to transcend normal communication. In the center of it all was Jake Morrison. The man who had been sent to die had not only survived, but had become something that defied classification. The surveillance showed him lifting boulders that weighed several tons, moving with speed that blurred the camera's ability to track him. Most disturbing of all, leading his people with an authority that made even the alien observers feel instinctively submissive. "This is impossible," said General Krex, the Council's top military commander. His insect-like features twitched with agitation as he studied the images. "Humans do not possess these capabilities. Our scientists have studied their physiology for decades. They are strong for their size, but they have clear limitations." "Clearly our scientists were wrong," Vexor replied with cold anger. "The question now is how many humans possess these abilities and how quickly they are spreading." The intelligence reports painted a picture that grew more alarming with each update. Human resistance cells on 47 worlds were displaying coordinated tactics that suggested they were receiving training and guidance from a central source. Individual humans were performing feats that their own people described as miraculous. Lifting crashed vehicles to rescue trapped survivors, running across terrain at speeds that should have been impossible, fighting with reflexes that let them dodge weapons fire at point-blank range. "It started on Terminus 7, the intelligence chief reported. Our analysis suggests that Jake Morrison and his followers have developed some kind of enhancement process that awakens dormant human potential. They are using their communication array to spread this knowledge to human populations across the galaxy." Vexor felt something he had not experienced in decades of ruling the galaxy: fear. The reptilian species that dominated the Council had maintained power through careful control of resources and populations. They had kept other species dependent and divided. Humans had been particularly useful because they were adaptable and hardworking, but they were also easily manipulated through economic pressure and social engineering. If humans could become physically and mentally superior to their rulers, then the entire power structure of the galaxy would collapse. Other species would see human success and demand better treatment for themselves. The careful balance that had maintained peace and prosperity for the ruling class would be destroyed. "We need to eliminate this threat before it spreads further," Vexor decided. "Prepare a battle fleet for immediate departure to Terminus 7. I want Jake Morrison and his followers destroyed completely. No survivors. No evidence left behind." Admiral Patricia Vance received her orders 3 days later. In her office on the military headquarters station, she read the mission briefing twice before she fully understood what the Council was asking her to do. She was to take a full battle group to Terminus 7 and sterilize the planet completely. Every human exile was to be eliminated along with all evidence of their settlement. The official justification was that the exiles had developed biological weapons that posed a threat to galactic security. But Patricia knew the real reason. Jake Morrison had become exactly what the Council had feared he would become: a symbol of human potential that inspired others to Demand better treatment. Patricia had volunteered for this mission against the advice of her staff officers. They pointed out that she had a personal relationship with Morrison that might compromise her judgment. They were right, but not in the way they thought. Patricia intended to go to Terminus 7 not to destroy Jake Morrison but to understand what he had become and decide for herself whether he represented a threat or an opportunity. The battle fleet that departed for Terminus 7 was the largest military force assembled in over a decade. 12 heavy cruisers with full fighter complements. Support vessels carrying enough firepower to reduce the planet's surface to molten glass. Troops equipped with weapons designed to penetrate any known defensive technology. As they approached the Death World, Patricia studied the intelligence reports and tried to reconcile them with the man she had known. Jake Morrison had always been exceptional, but the abilities described in these files seemed to belong to someone from a completely different species. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the planet's surface," the communications officer reported. "It is coming from Jake Morrison directly." "Put him through." The main screen activated to show a man who looked like Jake Morrison, but also somehow did not. He appeared to be in perfect physical condition despite 3 years of exile on a world that should have killed him within days. His eyes held a depth and intensity that she did not remember. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made even her experienced officers straighten unconsciously. "Hello, Patricia? I have been expecting you. Jake, you need to surrender. Immediately. The Council has authorized complete sterilization of your settlement. If you come with me peacefully, I might be able to negotiate terms for your people." Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it. "My people are no longer interested in the Council's terms. We have discovered what humans can become when we stop accepting the limitations that others place on us. Would you like to see?" Before Patricia could respond, the screen changed to show an aerial view of the settlement that intelligence had called impossible. Thousands of people moved through a complex of buildings and facilities that rivaled anything on the major worlds. Gardens flourished in soil that should have been barren. Structures rose from the landscape that seemed to grow from the rock itself rather than being built on top of it. This is what 3 years of human determination can accomplish when it is not constrained by alien oversight, Jake said. "Imagine what we could do with 3 decades, or 3 centuries. Patricia felt something shift inside her chest as she watched the images. For the first time in her long career, she began to question whether the human race had been accepting too little for too long. "Jake, the Council will never allow this to continue. They see you as a threat to galactic stability." "Then, perhaps it is time for galactic stability to change." Admiral Patricia Vance stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching her sensors track something that should have been impossible. Jake Morrison was approaching her battle fleet not in a spacecraft but somehow surviving in the vacuum of space itself. His transformed physiology had adapted even to the absolute cold and airless void between worlds. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as Jake moved through space with the fluid grace of someone swimming through water. He approached the massive warship without any protective equipment or life support systems. When he reached the hull, he somehow passed through the metal barriers as if they were not there. Patricia found him waiting in her private quarters when she returned from the bridge. He sat calmly in her chair, looking completely at ease despite having just performed feats that violated every known law of physics and biology. When she entered, he smiled with the warmth she remembered from their younger days, but his eyes held depths that spoke of experiences beyond normal human understanding. "You look well, Patricia. Command suits you." She remained standing near the door, unsure whether she was looking at her former student or something else entirely. "Jake, what have you become?" "I have become what humans were always meant to be before. We started accepting limits imposed by others." "Sit down, please. We have much to discuss before your fleet decides to attack my home." Patricia sat across from him and tried to reconcile this calm, confident figure with the broken exile who had been sent to Terminus 7 3 years ago. "The Council believes you pose a threat to galactic stability. They have authorized complete destruction of your settlement The Council is correct to be afraid. What we have built on Terminus 7 proves that humans do not need alien oversight to thrive. In fact, we do better without it. Other species are beginning to ask why they should accept subordinate status to reptilian overlords who contribute. Nothing but control. Through the ship's communication system, Patricia could hear reports from her subordinate commanders. The settlement on Terminus 7 was not hiding from their surveillance. Instead, the humans were openly displaying capabilities that made the Council's most advanced military technology seem primitive by comparison. Jake, I have orders to destroy everything you have built down there. 12 heavy cruisers with enough firepower to turn the planet's surface into glass. I know. That is why I came to speak with you first. You have a choice to make, Patricia. You can follow the Council's orders and try to destroy people who have committed no crime except refusing to accept slavery. Or you can join us and help humanity claim its rightful place among the stars. Before Patricia could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Her tactical officer's voice came through the communication system with barely controlled panic. Admiral, we have multiple contacts rising from the planet's surface. They appear to be moving without spacecraft. Patricia activated her personal display and saw something that made her question her own sanity. Hundreds of figures were rising from Terminus 7, moving through space with the same impossible grace that Jake had demonstrated. They spread out around her fleet in formations that spoke of military precision and tactical brilliance. My people are not here to attack your ships, Jake said calmly. They are here to demonstrate what humans can accomplish when we stop believing in our own limitations. Watch. The transformed humans began to move around the Council warships with speed and coordination that defied belief. They flowed through space like schools of fish, but with purpose and intelligence that was clearly directed by some form of communication that did not require technology. Patricia watched her most experienced officers struggle to track targets that moved faster than their weapons could aim. The tactical systems designed to handle any known threat were helpless against opponents who seemed to anticipate every defensive measure before it was implemented. This is impossible, Patricia whispered. This is human, Jake corrected. We are the only species in the galaxy that was designed to adapt and overcome any environment or challenge. The Council has spent centuries convincing us that we needed their guidance and protection. They were wrong. Reports continued to flow in from across the fleet. The transformed humans were not attacking, but they were demonstrating capabilities that made it clear they could destroy every Council vessel without significant effort. They moved through solid barriers as if they were not there. They survived in vacuum without protection. They coordinated their movements with precision that suggested some form of shared consciousness. Jake, even if what you say is true, the Council will never accept human independence. They will send larger fleets. They will use weapons of mass destruction if necessary. Let them try. Every human colony they attack will produce more people like us. Every act of oppression will awaken more humans to their true potential. The age of alien domination is ending, Patricia. The only question is whether humanity's former friends will stand with us or against us. Patricia felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Everything she had believed about human limitations and the necessity of Council oversight was crumbling before her eyes. The evidence was undeniable. Humans were capable of far more than anyone had imagined. When they were free to develop without artificial constraints, through the ship's sensors she could see the settlement on Terminus 7 in greater detail than the intelligence reports had provided. It was not just a collection of survival shelters, but a thriving city that rivaled anything on the core worlds. Gardens and manufacturing facilities and research centers that represented human ingenuity, unleashed from bureaucratic oversight. What about the other species? Patricia asked. The galaxy has known peace under Council rule for centuries. Peace for whom? Jake replied. The reptilian ruling class that takes the best resources while forcing everyone else to accept whatever scraps remain. The insectoid military commanders who treat other species like disposable tools. True peace can only exist between equals, not between masters and slaves. As if responding to his words, Patricia received reports from across the galaxy. Human rebellions on dozens of worlds were not just continuing, but spreading to other species who had been inspired by human example. The careful control systems that had maintained council authority for generations were breaking down as oppressed populations demanded better treatment. Admiral, we are receiving surrender requests from Council's forces on 17 worlds, her communications officer reported. Local governors are asking for terms rather than face continued rebellion. Patricia looked at Jake and saw in his eyes the same determination that had driven him to save 300 civilians at Kepler Station. He had not changed as much as she had thought. He had simply become more of what he had always been. A man who refused to accept injustice even when resistance seemed hopeless. The Council will never forgive me if I return without completing this mission. Then perhaps it is time to stop serving masters who demand forgiveness for refusing to commit genocide. Patricia made her decision. She opened a fleet-wide communication channel and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. All Council vessels, this is Admiral Vance, stand down all weapons and defensive systems. We are withdrawing from Terminus 7 effective immediately. The response from her subordinate commanders was immediate and divided. Some officers acknowledged her orders with relief, clearly uncomfortable with their mission of destroying defenseless exiles. Others demanded clarification and reminded her of the Council's direct orders. Admiral Krex is demanding an explanation, her communications officer reported. He says you are committing treason against the Galactic Council. Patricia looked at Jake, who had been watching the proceedings with calm satisfaction. Tell Admiral Krex that I am committing loyalty to the human race and to justice. If the Council considers that treason, then perhaps it is time to examine what the Council has become. The transformation of the galaxy did not happen overnight, but it began that day above Terminus 7, when Patricia Vance returned to Council space with her fleet intact but her mission abandoned. She brought with her evidence of human capabilities that could not be denied or suppressed. The man who had been sent to die as a broken exile had returned as something far more dangerous to the established order. He had become a symbol of human potential, unleashed, and a leader who inspired others to demand better than the scraps offered by alien masters. Jake Morrison had indeed become a legend, but not the kind that exists only in stories. He had become the kind of legend that changes the course of history and gives an entire species the courage to claim its rightful place among the stars.